there's these camps, and so much of what we do is divided into camps, and a conceptual artist may not care about technique, and conceptual work is very interesting to me. But I am firmly planted, my feet on the ground as an object maker. And the material that I have, I guess, embraced. I work with bronze, I work with wood. As my work in the studio shows, I work with a lot of materials to get to the glass. Going on 30 years now, glass seems to be the right material to illustrate what I'm thinking about.
Welcome to our 9th episode in our series, Masterclasses from the Studio of the Corning Museum of Glass. We've come to Providence, Rhode Island to visit the studio of acclaimed American glass sculptor, Daniel Clayman. In this video, we'll learn about Dan's processes and about his life as an artist. Dan has developed a number of processes highly specific to his needs as a sculptor. He's very comfortable working in large scale and equally comfortable working small scale. He works with 2 highly skilled assistants, and as a team, they make exquisite work. So we hope you enjoy glass casting with Daniel Clayman.
These models are currently what I'm working on for a body of work called the B.F.A project. The first one I started carving out of plaster, and this is about 2 weeks of work, and I'm not even near close to being done with the model. And I just kind of got thinking, with all the computer modeling knowledge that I have, that perhaps there was another solution to this. So the first one I did was milled on a computer-controlled milling machine out of styrofoam. This is a dense model maker styrofoam. And as you can see, the definition of all the detail is kind of soft. And then this is the second one, and the definition of the detail becomes a little bit more crisp and defined. And I thought this was a great advance from here to here. This is called a rapid prototype. It's made in a machine that's very much similar to a hot glue nozzle, laying down layers of a plastic the width of a human hair. That's how this is built. And the next one I made was much more detailed in terms of its crispness. I think the amount of detail is about the same, but this is just a crisper resolution. The big issue of using the rapid prototype technique is that you end up with something that maybe doesn't look handmade. And it's very important to me that my hand is in everything I make. So we make a wax pattern, and then I take it to the workbench, and in some way I almost I dumb it down in terms of I make it more of a handmade object than from a machine made. So when I carve this, it starts here, and I carve it so it's up exactly what I want. I'm just trying to illustrate a line of perfection. When I send it out to be rapid prototyped, it comes back way more perfect than I want it. So I reintroduce my hand through all the processes that we use. We use the traditional lost wax technique, and so what you've got to do is you have to make a rubber mold to go from the plastic generated model to a rubber mold that we can then make a wax model from. To make the rubber mold, I start by brushing up a coat of rubber that is less than 1/1000th of an inch thick, so that all the little teeny air bubbles get brushed out of all the detail. It's 6 to 8 layers, and each layer is pigmented with a different color so that we can see where each layer has been brushed on. We let it set overnight, come in the next day, and put the first half of what's called the mother mold, which is a plaster backing that stiffens it up so the rubber won't be flopping in air when we're working with it. There are lots of wax techniques for getting your wax model made out of your rubber mold. And the couple main ones are sloshing the wax around and then spilling it out, and that leaves a nice skin. But on a highly detailed piece like we're working on, I'm going to be left with many days of dressing the wax model. It's much better to go in and spend the hours painting it on very carefully with a soft wax and then back that up with a hard wax. It results in much less filling of those little micro holes on the tail end. I usually have 3 different pots of wax going. There's a red pot, a brown pot, the red wax being stiff and the brown pot being soft. And I make different combinations. There's a red-brown pot, the waxes are mixed together, and that's a really nice consistency to get the detail I'm looking for. And then the red wax, which is the hard wax, I use to back that up so we can make a very thin wax model, but still holds its shape. And then the brown wax, if I'm doing something that needs to be hand modeled and repaired, the brown wax is nice and soft to be able to push into little holes and make changes easily. Putting this first coat of the wax onto the mold of this size takes me about a day, and it's a full 8 to 10 to 12 hour day. And fortunately, it's something I really enjoy doing. It's part of what I lend to the work as a sculptor. I've made the original model, I've helped the technician make the rubber mold, and then it's my hand laying the wax in, and it's again my determination of how this is all going to go. After all the detail is painted in really nicely, and I've got a little bit of that red wax backup coat to stiffen it up, I trim the edges, and then I put the 2 halves of the mold together. And then I go in with really, really hot, that mixture of red-brown, so it's a little soft, but very hot. And I brush it and pour it into the seam, so it gets in there and remelts the seam just a little bit and makes that 2 halves as one. After the wax is still in the rubber mold and is cooled down, we strip the rubber mold off the wax model, and I'm left with the almost finished wax model ready to be dressed, final dressing and final, in the bronze foundry they'd call it chasing, all the little details. And if I've done a good job on brushing the wax up and done it really nicely, it still could take a full day, even sometimes 2, to really make this casting model just right. And I have all these little tools that have been hand filed to go into all the little grooves. All these little hardwood clay tools that I alter to go in. And it's quite fragile at this point because the surface, if you take a fingernail, it'll kind of dent the surface. And certainly if I tip the piece over, I could cause some real damage. But because it's wax, there's almost nothing I can't fix. I want everything to look intentional. So that's why I spend these hours poring over it with my magnifying glasses and really looking at all the details close up. The last thing we do prior to making the mold is to spray the piece with hairspray. Whatever makes hairspray sticky in somebody's hair, it makes the plaster want to stick to the wax model. If we didn't use that, it would bead up and we would be fighting ourselves trying to get the plaster nicely onto the detail. So after a lot of hairspray is put on there, Jim mixes up the plaster, and this is this very fine dental plaster. And Peter and I will lay up with brushes and really always brushing in the direction of the detail. So this piece had a lot of horizontal detail. So all of our brush strokes are with the grooves and with the channels. The dental plaster gets put on in 2 batches because we can't handle more than a little batch of dental plaster before it begins to stiffen up. Once the dental plaster is on, right away we can begin putting its interim coat on, which is the plaster silica and fiberglass. And then the outer layer is a cement. Why is there the inner layer? Very early on I discovered that if you put the cement right against the dental plaster, it gases and makes defects in the glass. And through a lot of experimentation, I figured out that if you just put an interlayer, which helps to strengthen everything, then you don't have that same problem. The last layer is a kiln cement called KS4, and it's a 3,000 degree kiln cement made for making industrial furnace parts. And we use it because it is bulletproof. You might notice that there are some ribs going around the mold, and we found that that allows us to make a thinner mold wall overall, but gives us the strength that a thicker mold would take. The ribs actually work as a structural member. The lost wax process refers to a traditional foundry technique of making an object out of wax first. You then cover it with a high temperature plaster investment mold material. Once that is set, you have to remove the wax through high heat. Some people burn it out, and in my studio we steam it out. It's just environmentally safer. The steam generators are just surplus restaurant steam pots. Once the mold has been thoroughly cleaned out after the steaming process, it's pretty much ready to go into the kiln. So we tip it over and wash the top to make sure nothing gets down into the mold, and then crane that into the kiln, ready for it to receive its glass. So that goes into the kiln and doesn't need any support with kiln bricks around it. It just goes right into the kiln and can hold 60 pounds of glass without any worry or danger of it breaking out. And these melt for 26 hours at 1600 degrees in order to get all the big bubbles to rise up and out of the casting. So this technique that I've come up with over the years really allows me not to worry about how long I need to melt. We'll put this well-made, strong mold in and set it for firing and not have to worry about it. The amphora has been in the kiln for about 14 days. The full firing cycle is approximately 14 to 15 days, with a couple days to bring it up in temperature, a day for it to melt the glass, and then 12 to 13 days for it to come back down to room temperature. The cooling of the work is very specifically controlled by the computers. The annealing process is critical in all glass processes as you cool the glass from hot molten down to room temperature. This annealing process allows the strain from the differential of temperatures from the inside to the outside of the piece be equalized. So look at that. Incredible.
It looks really good.
Fade is nice.
It's not a lot of work.
There's not a lot of work here.
No.
It's beautiful. So after the piece has come out of its mold and is successfully cleaned, and we see that it's a really nice casting, then the excess glass, the sprue, has to be cut off. On pieces with big areas, we'll cove out the inside, the center of the area to be ground. I'm really just grinding the edge. If I'm taking less material away, it's actually grinding down quicker, and I can see what's happening and not get fatigued holding this rather heavy cast object. And then I'll tip the piece over before going back to the wheel and just chamfer the edge. A chamfer is a machine shop term for bevel. So I'll just bevel the edge of the bottom. If you leave that edge sharp, it's much more likely just from a tap to cause a big chip out up into the piece. And if there's a little bevel there, that doesn't happen nearly as much. I feel like I arrived on this earth ready to make things. Very early on, I was building model airplanes, and my first kind of obsession was the space program. And I was really taken by, I think, by curiosity, by this 60s notion of we can go out there and see what's there. And I just remember, I can even feel kind of tickled, excited right now, thinking about being young and being charged up about something. To construct the model for this piece, I've made the original drawing by hand and then brought it into the computer program because it's just easier to manipulate and do all the pattern making I need to do. And I've sliced the model up into inch-thick sections on the computer, and then all of these triangles show me the whole 112 that will get laid up to be this tapered shape. What I'm doing here is cutting out each triangle, and then I glue it to the plywood, and then it just gets cut on the chop saw. After all the pieces of plywood are cut out, then, and they're all numbered with magic marker, they're all screwed and glued together or nailed together with a pneumatic nail gun. And I do that over probably 2 days so that each section the glue sets up so that I don't start going wonky out of true and not notice it. So I let each probably 2-foot section really set up overnight and then come back in and still build from it. Mostly everything I'm working on involves light in some way, and this solid spire, for me, is a physical manifestation of a beam of light. And when it's finished, it will glow beautifully. It'll be this pale, kind of a sea green that will have thick and thin parts and will just look like it's a glowing spire of light. My working process here in the studio really relies on the fact that I don't hand off the making of the sculpture itself. I'm the sculptor. But once the model that's going to lead to the finished sculpture is finished, I hand it off to Peter or Jim, the technicians. I've been blessed to have Jim Iannone in the studio for 12 years now. He frees me up to concentrate on my work rather than where's the plaster bucket going to be, or how's the truck going to get unloaded. So Jim has been indispensable in how the studio's run and how my work has increased in scale. He's really helped me figure a lot of that out. Peter is the shop carpenter. Both Peter and Jim are artists in their own right. And I might mention Mary Ann, who runs the office. As a team that we just really enjoy working together. In this case, we had to straighten out the wooden model. It had gotten wet, so it had a little curve to it. So I'm having Peter screw on some melamine, basically some plywood, which will act as a splint, and then the styrofoam is glued on the back of that, and that becomes the reservoir for where the glass is going to go. So when the mold is flipped, if you can imagine, when it's melting, we'll hold the whole amount of glass, but that will sink down to be just the amount of glass required for the piece. How do I do that? I know the specific gravity, basically, of the wood and of the glass, so I can match through volumetric calculations exactly how much glass to put into the mold. The quickest modern material to seal something with is shellac, because it's alcohol-based and fully sets up within 12 to 15 minutes. And I also like the way it looks on the model. It looks very beautiful. That orange, that amber shellac. Typically, we'll go back and put one more coat of shellac on, let that set up, and then we wax it with just a carnauba wax, like an auto wax. We'll wax it and buff it so it's got a nice slick surface, and this is whether it's a smooth surface to be resolved or a rough textured surface. It still has to get sealed and then released, and what we use as a release is an old-time machinist oil, which is a lard oil, and it's a great oil because it's water-soluble. So it behaves like a regular oil until you go to wash it off, and it washes off very easily. If we hadn't done all of this, we put all the plaster on it, and we know the plaster is going to stick and we're not going to get that model out of the mold very easily. When I first started casting glass into plaster molds, there was some knowledge, but it was kind of loose. And it resulted in lots of failures over time. And one thing I discovered in my first few years, that if you pay attention to the water to plaster ratio by weight and mix it properly, your percentage of success is going way up. Very early on, I started setting charts up and standardizing everything. We know by experience and good record keeping how much plaster material that we have to mix up to make this mold. And that's 2 big garbage cans of plaster that Jim will have weighed out, ready to go, plus some backup plaster in case I feel like I need more. First, we pour the plaster around the dam, and that just fills it up to where the sprue is, and then hand apply a conforming layer to the model. So that's, and it can be as little as an inch thick because of the mold material we're putting on the outside of this is so bulletproof. But what we found over time, that 2 inches thick made removal much easier. When the piece is all fired and cooled, it gives much more room to get tools down in and get lifting straps underneath the piece to be able to lift it out of the mold easily. Now, why don't we just pour a big block of it? We want the plaster mold to conform to the shape of the piece because it allows the mold to heat up quicker and cool down more evenly because you don't have a huge mass of plaster over this little triangle shape. The thinner the mold can be, the better you are for heat penetration. But you're always balancing how thick or thin does this mold be to withstand the heat and the weight of the glass in the mold. As the plaster begins to set up, we work a little quicker. While the next batch is getting ready to come on, I'll just put some water in my hand and really press a layer that's still movable, still has a plastic quality to it, and really push all that air so that we don't end up with a big air bubble that the glass can seep into and make a problem for grinding at the other end. However, on the final coat, we like to leave it a little bit rough so that it clings. There's a mechanical lock to the next layer. So good mold making means you don't really smooth one surface to the next. As plaster sets, it has an exothermic reaction, means it heats up, and then so we know that when the mold is cool again, that it's ready to be handled, it's bench set long enough. So then we'll go and we'll scrape all the kind of overspill all over the mold and just clean up the workbench, clean up the work table, and I'll take a draw knife and draw down the side. It's the easiest way to move the plaster we don't care about. And the reason I do that is so that when we put the cement outside, it's really conforming to the shape of the piece. The cement's very strong. We can get away with a much thinner mold over a large piece. The last layer that goes on this type of piece is the kiln cement called KS4. We know that for every 100-pound bag of KS4, it's 8 pounds of water. We wet the mold before we put the cement on. If we don't pre-wet the plaster mold, when we go to put the cement on, the plaster mold is going to take the water out of that cement and result in a weaker material. The cement went on at the end of the day, and the next morning, the cement is strong enough to be able to start flipping the mold over to get the original sculpture model out. We use the chain hoist to lift the piece up off the table, and that requires a little bit of pry bars and getting wood under and finding where the center of gravity in because it's a tapered form. We move the piece onto the floor, onto styrofoam, and then just roll it. The styrofoam comes out very easily, and the piece of melamine that we use to straighten the model out comes out very easily. And then with just a little tug, the wood model comes right out of the mold too, and we're left with the cavity that's going to receive the glass. I gotta say, as much as I'm into the technical aspects of what I'm doing, I'm not particularly enamored with glass as a material to work with because it's so difficult. But I'm enamored with how it looks when I'm done. There's, you know, there's all these qualities of glass that, you know, it's transparency, it's durability, but it's fragile nature. But when I teach, what I always say is it's worthwhile mastering what we're doing to relieve you, the student, from the anxiety of, oh my God, I can't make that. So if you're a thinking artist and things are in your head, it's great to master the way to get that out. Never has there been a time where I've taught anywhere that I haven't finished my teaching gig and gone home and it doesn't happen the next day or the next week. It could, but 3 months later, I'll cue into something that we talked about and something will ignite. And it could be a way to do something or it could be a completely new thought. So, you know, the teaching continues to feed me. It's just something that I think really helps inform my work and push me, because things can get cloistered here in the studio day after day. So it's good to be out in the world and engaging with other people. The class we're finishing up today is a great example of something that thrills me about passing the legacy on. I've been at this for 30 years now. As ideas come, it thrills me to kind of talk to people about how, you know, talk to my students about how that happens. And also as a technician, which is quite separate from being the artist who's thinking up the ideas, I'm also very interested in all the technology. All my work is made from whatever tool is right. And so I come here and I see people doing things I haven't seen before. Even the most beginning student, I find at the end of a 1-week, 2-week session, really has a lot to offer me as I see them trying to work through whatever either visual or technical problem. The museum in particular has such a cross-section of historical all the way to the most just made contemporary that they're constantly building the collection to see how history affects what's happening now. And, you know, for any artist to say that they've invented something completely, absolutely new, I don't know that that happens much. But for an artist to say, wow, I saw this and was really inspired by it, that's a place, the museum is a place that's just incredible for that. My interest in the technical part of what we do is not about being technically perfect. I like building a vocabulary of technical knowledge in service of what I'm trying to do as an artist. And one thing I've been writing on the board all week here is it's the look, not the way. And that's what's most important to me. Part of what I'm known for is my technical prowess. But none of that is worth anything if I'm making objects that most of all don't interest me. So my kind of mission for myself as an artist is to stay interested. And I'm now 25 years post-school and am still anxious to get to the studio every morning. So it's a pretty incredible thing to live as an artist.